All right, today I wanted to talk about The Lord of the Rings, and most specifically, I wanted to talk about Sauron and the problem of Sauron. Because you see, the issue with Sauron, particularly in any sort of adaptation or expansion of the world, like as you would see in Rings of Power, despite the fact that he is, the greatest evil in Middle Earth, he represents everything that is wrong, this overpowering corruption and darkness and expansion of every kind. Despite all this fact, he plays little screen time. Let's put it that. I was gonna say not quite. He doesn't play a minor role. He's little screen time or page time from there. And it's really interesting that you would do this to your villain because we're so used to the kind of the archetype where there's a very simple calculation that usually happens. So usually what you'll have is you'll have a villain, and this villain will be, powerful, be evil, and smart, something like this. And how smart, how powerful, and how evil is fairly nebulous. But the greater the villain you can prove, so maybe he's like this evil or this powerful or this one or this one, these different measurements. We got small, medium, and large, as it were. If the hero over here manages to defeat him here, then the hero is at least this good, strong, and heroic sort of deal. If he defeats him here, then he's this much good, strong, and heroic. And if he defeats him here, if the villain is proven to be a large villain or something like that, and the hero manages to defeat them, it's this measurement that we're doing. And this is the reason why most often, especially like in comic book heroes, will always have a great revelation in this regard where the heroes are defined by the villain. And the reason why is because of this contrast. This is something that audiences understand very well. You have Army A and Army B, and Army A beats Army B. Army A is stronger. It's this really simple sort of dynamic that's coming into play. And this is kind of what a lot of stories are relying on. It's this dance between the two heroes and villains. And this is what it is. And this is something that is not quite trope, but this is an aspect, as you might say, for stories that is really hard to break. It's very, very, very rare you will ever see anyone do anything outside this. So it's really interesting that, Tolkien and Lord of the Rings decided to do this front and center, where you have one, arguably the greatest fantasy series ever manages to have a major villain, the capital V, villain, who's never really seen or anything like that. He's completely unknown. At this point. And what this does is this is not necessarily so much as a direct criticism of anything, although I think Rings of Power does a terrible job generally of it. But this just kind of talks about the interesting problem that Sauron, if you're any sort of adaptation would face in dealing with Sauron, simply because of this idea that he is more of a presence. He is more of a presence than an actual character, which is probably what Tolkien was going for. He represents some sort of greater idea of evil rather than an individual person, because there's an aspect of stories that's actually kind of bizarre and interesting to some degree, where you'll present the audience. The audience will be here, and you'll present them with a sort of mystery. Some sort of this mystery. It could be, who is this mysterious character who's in the shadows? It could be, I don't know. I keep drawing a blank. Lost. Let's just pick out some real world Lost example. WTF is going on? What's the black smoke? What's this island going on? Why are we here? What's going on? You have all these great mysteries, and what it is the audience has this vague conception of an idea. And it's kind of the same thing where, if any of you have ever tried to write a story or recreate a piece of art, you have this where it's a vague conception of an idea, and the only thing you really know that's really defined is that it's awesome. It's fantastic. This is super good. And when you begin to put it into paper, you start to realize, if you're drawing a picture, you're drawing this, and you have, in my head, I have this image of a person, and they'll look like this, and there'll be, this will be a person, and he'll be gallant. Maybe he's on a horse. He'll be on a horse from here. I don't really know how to draw horses, but it turns out, actually now that I'm drawing it, looks more like a hammerhead shark than anything. So, maybe this is, not really working, and there's trees, and there's this beautiful horizon, and the sun is shining over it, and all this sort of stuff going on. But in actuality is not as good. And this is the dumb part, the boring part that's always sad when you become, as an artist, or try and create everything, is this is not quite what you had in your head. There's something much greater that you had that you wanted to go into detail for. So you have this vague conception, and this is something that you can use to great effect as a story writer. Worlds use this to great effect, where you have this vague conception and it's always greater than what the audience can actually imagine, because there's this semblance of, especially once they see something, like you would explain to me the ending of Lost or the mystery or anything like that, you'd be like, no, that's dumb. That wouldn't be it. It's going to be something much better than that in sort of this aspect of it. And this is something that actually the Lord of the Rings uses to great effect from here. Because what they do is basically they have this, giant world. We'll say like this. Let's draw it down here. And so, you have mountains. You have Mordor right here. And this is Mount Doom. And then, you have the mountains, and you have the gap, and then the mountains over here. And then we have Gondor down here. And this is Haradrim is down here, the H-Fellows. And you have the mountains going up here. No, they go up here, I believe. Yeah. And then this is Rohan. And then the forest. This is Lothlorien. And then Mirkwood is over here. And then you have this weird lake with some mountains, and this is Rune here, and then up here you have the Lonely Mountain up here, and yeah, I can't remember. I think the Blue Mountains are over here, something like that, and this is the Grey Havens, and this is the Shire, and this whole thing, and then you have these mountains up here, which nobody really knows what's up. Andor, I want to say it's called. I'm trying to remember. We had a Lord of the Rings Risk board game, and we did a lot of time staring at it. And even though while the board game is kind of a disfiguration of the maps that I believe Christopher Tolkien came up with, they were actually quite cool to look at for all this time. So you have all this, and what you have then is you have this amazing world that goes here to Rivendell, down to Lothlorien, to Rohan, to over here, and then they go to Rohan from there, and then of course the other fellows go down here to Minas Morgul, and then to Mount Doom, and then they go to the Black Gate. And this is kind of the story. And what you have is it's actually a fairly defined story where it focuses on this strict path. And so what you're left to do is, as you create a more beautiful and amazing world in this lane, the audience begins to see these other areas. I would always stare at this map, oh my gosh, what is going on in these other places? What's going on in Rune? What's going on in Haradrim? What's the dynamic like? What's the political dynamic like? Why they got these elephants, the Mumkill, Oliphants from here, going on, everything like this. What's going on? And it's this vague conception of this wonderful world and mystery and everything like that. You do the same thing. I did a lot of that with Harry Potter, all this stuff. And this is just where it comes from. And this is not a bad thing by any means. It's just a question of how you can use it. And this is just goes back to the whole challenge of Sauron, is how do you portray something? Because one of the things that you realize is that when you present him, like in the case of Rings of Power, as just a human, it's really not, it's not enough. It's not enough. Because you got to think, the greatest evil has to go beyond these sorts of petty things. You can't really get bogged down in like grudges, something where great evil is not going to, because if you can't get over something, or you have something stuck in your head and you can't get beyond it, you're not really a great evil. You're just a regular guy. There's this scene where in Schindler's List, because this YouTube shorts have got me again, Schindler's List, where Amon Goth, I want to say, or Ray Fiennes and Oscar Schindler are talking, and they're talking about power, and it's this idea of power, and it's this, I mean, the whole movie is utterly like, it's funny. I watched it when I was a kid, and it wasn't that horrifying, and then now I don't know if I can even watch it because it's just too horrifying from there. Just all of this, I don't know, there's this sort of teenager detachment I was able to have with a lot of it. And now I don't have that anymore. I can't do it. From here, and so you have this idea of power, and Aemon's like, oh yeah, we have the power of life and death because we can kill. We can kill. I say I give the word, and death follows from here. And Oscar's like, no. True power is you have the power, but don't use it. And it's this weird aspect of power. And so what you have is this abstract aspect of power. And what Amon Goth is looking at, but he's looking at like a small or medium version of villain power. It's like, I have the ability to rob convenience stores. You're like, you're not thinking big enough. Okay, I have the ability to rob banks. You're not thinking big enough. I have the ability to rob the entire world. And it's like, okay, maybe that's big enough. It's this aspect of conception where it's we're measuring the villains from here. And this is something that Sauron has such a great effect in the books, is he's not really a character. He's not human. We don't see anything like desire or greed or anything like that. He's almost something like a force, or presence is a good one for me that I always think of, because this ever, the all-seeing eye is this aspect of his attention, his will. You have this whole aspect, and what it means is that he's this almost undefinable creature. And once you begin to define him, once you begin to paint this vague conception, down to the exacts, it really starts to fall off, and it loses this grand mystery from it, because you have this idea of, man, does Sauron ever get really pissed? Does he stub his toe? Does he think naughty thoughts? All of these aspects where it begins to take this person and turn them into, a powerful guy. And this kind of encapsulates the whole issue with something like Sauron and any sort of adaptation. This is something where I think the Rings of Power have just not been able to capture that in terms of what it is with Sauron. Because I think in some of the other video games that you have is you do have Sauron, but they keep him faceless. They keep him, this, aloof sort of deal from here, to where they can't really manage to nail it down, and it just doesn't quite capture what people's imagination have already painted through from there. So, just some thoughts I had on this, and I kind of want to go over it, and I hope you guys enjoy this one, and I'll see you in the next.